You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? Like when you walk into a room and sense the air's too still? That's how I felt the first time I saw the old house on Willow Lane. If I had known what was waiting for me inside, I would have turned around, jumped back in my car, and never looked back. But hindsight is a cruel thing, isn't it? Let me start from the beginning. A few months ago, my Aunt Margaret passed away. We weren't close. She was one of those relatives you only saw at funerals or the occasional family gathering. But apparently, she had no kids and had left me her house in her will. It came out of nowhere, really. One day, I'm living my boring little life, and the next, I'm the proud owner of a massive, decrepit Victorian house in the middle of nowhere. When I first arrived, I almost turned right back around. The house was massive, sure, but it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The paint peeled off in long, curling strips. The windows were dark and grimy, like they'd forgotten what sunlight looked like. And the door? It had claw marks, I swear. But a free house is a free house, right? At least that's what I told myself as I pushed the door open. The door creaked like something out of a horror movie. I stepped inside and immediately felt a chill, like someone had left a window open somewhere. But there was no breeze, just stale air that clung to my skin. The first thing I noticed was the smell, moldy, damp, like wet wood, and something sour underneath it. The second thing was the quiet. It wasn't the kind of quiet you get on a peaceful evening. It was the kind that pressed on your ears, heavy and unnatural. The hallway stretched out in front of me, narrow and dark. To the left, there was a parlor room with faded wallpaper that looked like it had been yellow once, but now had streaks of brown running down it, almost like it was bleeding. To the right was a staircase. It spiraled upward, disappearing into the gloom. I called out, "Hello!" My voice sounded weird in the space, like it didn't belong there. I waited, half hoping someone would answer, half hoping they wouldn't. Silence. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This was just an old house. Old houses creak and smell weird. That's what they do. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight and started exploring. The parlor was filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. There was a sofa with torn upholstery, a rocking chair that looked like it had seen better centuries, and a piano in the corner. Its keys were yellowed, and I swear one of them was pressed down, like someone had been playing it and stopped mid-note. I moved into the dining room next. The table was long and narrow, with chairs lining either side. A massive chandelier hung above it, its crystals clouded and dull. The table was set with dishes, actual plates and cups, as if someone had just walked away from dinner, except the food on them wasn't food anymore. It was black, fuzzy, and moving. I gagged and backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. That's when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. It was faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. My stomach dropped. The footsteps weren't hurried. They were deliberate, slow and steady, like someone or something was pacing above me. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. This was supposed to be an empty house. No one had lived here for years, not since my aunt, and she'd passed away months ago. "Hello," I called again, my voice cracking this time. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Old houses make noise, don't they? Maybe it was just the wood settling or a bird in the attic. But then something upstairs creaked. I didn't move. My brain screamed at me to turn around, walk out the door, and leave this place behind. But there was a part of me, the part that gets people killed in horror movies, that needed to know what was up there. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the staircase. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound echoing through the house. The banister was covered in dust, and I kept my hand off it, afraid it might crumble if I touched it. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before me, long and dark. The only light came from my phone's flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. There were doors on either side of the hallway, most of them closed. "Is anyone there?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. I stepped forward, my shoes scuffing against the worn floorboards. As I passed the first door, I noticed something strange. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see into the room. Inside there was a bed, neatly made, and a dresser against the wall. On top of the dresser was a mirror. At first I thought it was just my reflection in the glass, but then I realized the figure wasn't moving with me. It was a woman standing perfectly still, her head tilted slightly to the side. She wore a dress that looked old-fashioned, like something out of the 19th century. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and sunken. She smiled. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking as I aimed it into the room, but when I looked again, the mirror was empty. The woman was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe the glass was warped or I was just imagining things, but my gut told me otherwise. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a faint whisper, "Stay." I whipped around, shining the flashlight back into the room. Nothing. No woman, no whisper, just that damn mirror staring back at me, warped and dusty. "Okay," I muttered to myself, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm officially losing it." But deep down I knew I wasn't. I backed out of the room, my breath shaky, and turned to face the rest of the hallway. The other doors loomed ahead, shadows gathering around them. As I moved forward, the air grew colder, so cold that I could see my breath puffing out in little clouds. The next door was shut tight, its handle rusted. I hesitated, debating whether to open it. Part of me was screaming to turn around and leave the house entirely, but another part, the curious, foolish part, kept me rooted in place. I reached out, my hand trembling, and turned the knob. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a room that was almost entirely empty. Almost. There was a chair in the center of the room, old and wooden, with a single rope coiled around its backrest. The rope was frayed, its ends dangling like it had been cut recently. And then I noticed the walls. They were covered in scratches, long jagged marks that crisscrossed over each other, gouged deep into the wood. It was like someone or something had clawed at them, desperate to get out. That's when I heard the sound again. The footsteps. But this time they weren't above me, they were behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my phone. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the faint rhythmic creak of footsteps. They were coming closer, slow and deliberate, like whoever or whatever was taking their time. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just the footsteps, growing louder, and then they stopped, right in front of me. I couldn't see anything. There was nothing there, just empty air. But I felt it, a presence, cold and heavy, pressing down on me. My flashlight started to flicker, the beam of light growing weaker, and then, in the dim glow, I saw it. A handprint. It appeared on the wall next to me, clear as day, pale and wet, like someone had pressed their hand against the wood, but there was no one there. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't real," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it was. The handprint started to smear, like invisible fingers were dragging across the wall, and then from somewhere deep within the house I heard it again, that voice. "Stay!" My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The word echoed in my mind, "Stay." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. "No," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. "No, I'm not staying." The house seemed to disagree. The floor beneath me groaned loudly, and I swear it felt like it dipped, like it was trying to pull me down. My flashlight flickered again, casting wild shadows across the walls, and I stumbled back toward the stairs. As I turned, the air in the hallway grew impossibly cold, and a sound rose up behind me, low and guttural, like something trying to form words, but not quite human. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I bolted for the stairs, my footsteps pounding against the wood, but as soon as I reached the top step, the sound of rushing footsteps followed me. Something was chasing me. I didn't dare look back. The stairs creaked and groaned beneath my weight, and for a terrifying second I thought they were going to collapse. When I reached the bottom, I lunged for the front door and yanked it open, but the door didn't budge. The knob was ice cold in my hand, and no matter how hard I twisted or pulled, it wouldn't move. "Come on," I hissed, panic bubbling in my chest. I pounded on the wood, shouting, "Let me out!" Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming not to. But I couldn't help it. At the top of the stairs, something stood in the shadows. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long, bending at strange angles. Its head tilted to the side the way a curious animal might, and I could see two glowing eyes staring down at me. It didn't move. It just watched me, its presence filling the room like a storm cloud. I tried the door again, desperation making my hands shake. Still locked. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure tilted its head the other way, its glowing eyes narrowing, and then it started to descend the stairs. Its movements were slow and deliberate, each step making the wood groan like it was carrying the weight of something impossibly heavy. As it moved closer, I could see it more clearly. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its mouth... God, its mouth! It was too wide, filled with sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to glisten in the faint light. I backed away, pressing myself against the door. "Stay back!" I shouted, though I doubted it cared. The thing stopped at the bottom of the stairs, its head lowering as it stared at me. Then, in that same low, guttural voice, it spoke. "You were chosen." "Chosen? For what?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "To stay," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "I don't want to stay," I yelled. It tilted its head again, almost as if it was amused. "You have no choice." And then the lights went out completely. The darkness was suffocating, thick and oppressive. My flashlight had given up entirely, leaving me blind. I pressed myself harder against the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Please," I whispered into the void, unsure if I was begging the house, the thing in the shadows, or whatever cruel twist of fate had led me here. For a moment the silence stretched on, heavy and expectant. Then I felt it, breath, cold, damp breath against my ear. "You belong here," it whispered, the voice low and dripping with malice. I screamed, lunging forward and throwing myself at the door with all my strength. This time it gave way. I stumbled out onto the front porch, nearly falling down the steps. The night air hit me like a slap, sharp and cold. But I didn't care. I was outside. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys, and threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I slammed the car into reverse and peeled out of the driveway. As I sped down the dirt road, the house loomed in my rearview mirror, its dark windows watching me like eyes. But just as I turned a corner, something shifted. A light flicked on in one of the upstairs rooms. It wasn't the warm glow of a lamp or candle. It was cold, blue, and unnatural, spilling out into the night like a beacon. And standing in the window was a figure, tall, pale, watching. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. The house nothing more than a distant memory in the rear-view mirror. I'd like to tell you that was the end of it, that I went home, slept it off, and never looked back. But that wouldn't be the truth. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept the lights on at night, double-checked every lock on my doors and windows, and still I felt like I wasn't alone. The dreams started not long after. They weren't dreams, really, more like nightmares. Every night I'd find myself back in the house. It was always the same. I'd be standing in that hallway, staring at the open door with the mirror inside. And every night she'd be there. The woman in the mirror, she never moved, never spoke. She just stared at me with that faint, unsettling smile. But somehow I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to come back. It got worse. Things started happening in my apartment. Small things at first. Lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own. Then, one night, I woke up to find a handprint on my bedroom mirror. It was the same as the one in the house. That's when I knew I couldn't outrun it. Whatever that thing in the house was, it had followed me. I don't know how to explain what happened next. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe the house had some kind of pull on me. But one night I found myself back on Willow Lane, standing in front of that cursed house. It was waiting for me. The front door was wide open, the darkness inside beckoning like an old friend, and against every instinct screaming in my head, I stepped inside. The air inside the house was colder than I remembered, biting at my skin like a winter wind. The door creaked shut behind me, though I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. It knew I was back. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The house felt alive, humming with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. I didn't need my flashlight this time. A faint, sickly blue light seemed to seep from the walls, casting long shadows that danced in the corners of my vision. "You wanted me back," I said aloud, my voice trembling. "I'm here. Now what?" At first there was no response, just the creaks and groans of the old wood, the distant sound of wind rattling through broken windows. But then, from somewhere deep within the house, I heard the faintest sound, a child's laughter. It was soft and fleeting, like a memory brought to life. My body stiffened, and I turned toward the hallway. The light was strongest there, pulling me forward like a current. I didn't want to move, but my legs had other plans. Step by step, I found myself walking down the hall, past the parlor and the dining room, past the scratches on the walls and the clawed-up floorboards. I stopped in front of the staircase. The blue light spilled down the steps, casting the banister in an eerie glow. I could feel it now, a weight pressing down on me, the same cold, heavy presence I'd felt before. "You can fight this," I told myself. "You don't have to go up there." But I did. The steps groaned beneath my weight as I climbed, each one protesting louder than the last. By the time I reached the top, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The hallway stretched out before me, impossibly long. The doors on either side were closed now, but one at the very end stood ajar, the same one with the mirror inside. That's where the light was coming from. I walked toward it, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the room exactly as I remembered it. The bed, the dresser, the mirror, and her. She was standing in front of the glass this time, her back to me. Her dress was even more tattered than before, hanging off her thin frame like cobwebs. Her head tilted slightly as she stared into the mirror, but her reflection, it wasn't hers. In the glass I saw myself, but it wasn't me, not really. The version of me in the mirror looked wrong. My skin was pale, almost translucent, and my eyes were hollow, black pits. My mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, far too wide, revealing jagged teeth that didn't belong to me. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The woman turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of her face. Her smile was back, sharp and cruel. "You already know," she said, her voice echoing in my mind like 1,000 whispers. And then, before I could react, she lunged. The world tilted, and I fell backward, my head hitting the floor with a sickening crack. Darkness swallowed me, but only for a moment. When I opened my eyes, everything was different. The room was gone. The house was gone. I was standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. Only it wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. I reached up to touch my face, and the glass rippled like water beneath my fingers. On the other side, the woman smiled, her expression triumphant. She raised a hand, and I watched in horror as my reflection waved back at me. "No," I whispered, pounding on the glass. "Let me out!" But the woman was already turning away, leaving me trapped in the mirror, my screams muffled and useless. Through the distorted glass I saw her walk out of the room, her steps slow and deliberate. She was wearing my face now, my body, and as she disappeared into the hallway, the last thing I heard was her voice, soft and mocking. "You belong here now." I've been in the mirror ever since, watching as she lives my life. No one knows it's not me, no one hears me screaming, and the worst part? I know I'm not the first. If you ever find yourself on Willow Lane, don't stop, don't go inside, and whatever you do, don't look in the mirror.